All right. What it is
Oh
autographed
yeah.
copy of the movie
Oh shit.
and the autographed comic book with my movie stubs autographed.
Oh, whoa. Those are the original stubs, huh?
Yep, yep. Yeah, if
Wow.
I can read it, was this? Shit, I can't even read this. November. It's either October 10th or no, October 11th or November 11th, 10th, and then September 15th. I guess that was the first time I saw it.
Wow. So tell me the story of getting those autographed and everything.
Yeah, definitely can. So I had seen the movie when it came out the first time, and then I'm from Toronto originally. That's where I'm
Mm-hmm.
from, and obviously Scott Pilgrim is about Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
For the DVD release, Edgar Wright came back to town to do a signing and a special screening. And so I got him to sign along with Brian Lee O'Malley, who's the comic book creator. And he also had with him Ellen Wong, who played Knives Chow
Mm-hmm.
at the autograph session. And so they all autographed my Scott Pilgrim comic book.
That's so
Edgar
cool.
Wright wrote A+ and A++ for going twice in theaters.
Yeah.
And then they did the movie as well. And then that night, if you attended the autograph signing session, you got free tickets to go see this in-person screening that Edgar was hosting. And then there was probably about like 6 or 7 actors that were also in the movie that were also there that were like all local actors. So like
Oh yeah, yeah.
members of like Crash and the Boys, trying to remember who else was there, but like, yeah, Knives Chow was there. Michael Cera was not there, unfortunately.
Uh-huh.
Uh, but yeah, it
Was
was a
it for a convention or something, or were they just screening the film and
it would no, it was just for promotional purposes. Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I wonder about like kind of what happened with the whole release of this movie when you consider that it was kind of a box office dud and just not very warmly received at the time. It seems like a function of poor marketing and also I don't know. It's just wild to think about considering this property was. I mean, I found out some things in my research this time around that I had not known, namely that they were trying to develop this as far back as 2004, like right after he does Shaun of the Dead, and they had I can't recall the studio, but the studio had optioned the rights to O'Malley's graphic novel before the first volume was even published. So
Oh, okay.
he had
Yeah.
just like a tremendous amount of goodwill or interest in the project from the get go, and Edgar Wright was the first person they came to. 2005 is when Michael Bacall comes on to co-write the screenplay, and then it's a few more years until they actually start making the thing. I've read that at the time Edgar Wright was working on Ant-Man and bailed on
Fell apart.
Ant-Man. Yeah, the first of several times that project fell apart. Yeah, that's so cool, man. I've never been able to have a real kind of genuine screening experience like that. Just based on where I've lived and just the area that I've been in for most of my life, not really conducive to those kinds of events unless it's like a really big convention or something maybe. Yeah, I came to this movie pretty late actually. It was not on my radar when it came out. 2010 I graduated high school and was just kind of really starting to discover things in cinema beyond what I had really grown up with. But I probably didn't see this movie until like 2017, 2018 maybe. I had known Edgar Wright as a filmmaker, was a huge fan of Shaun of the Dead, was also a huge fan of Hot Fuzz, and this was one that became an immediate favorite. It was just like instantly, it clicked with me. I got everything that it was going for. I loved the aesthetic. I loved the soundtrack. We'll talk a lot about the soundtrack because it's so important for this film. But I was reading around, and some of the stuff that he was pulling from to influence this movie was very interesting to me. He was really inspired by Mario Bava's movie Danger Diabolique, which I've not seen. I've seen a lot of Mario Bava movies, but not that one. But also Beyond the Valley of the Dolls and Phantom of the Paradise, which that I can see that kind of in the DNA of this movie a little bit, the kind of wild, ostentatious rock opera aspect of it. I've not specifically read the graphic novels, but I've seen lots of pages, and it's just this perfect combo of like one artist's vision being kind of heralded by another artist's vision to a different medium, that I feel like is so rare, especially nowadays, and something that, like, we hear about all this intellectual property all the time being taken up and adapted by new people in new ways and stuff, and very rarely is something like legitimately improved upon. And I feel like that happened with Scott Pilgrim. They're incorporating the aesthetics of comic books and video games, but also the structure of comic books and video games in this movie, which I feel like is what makes it work so well. You get this, like, each level going from level to level, boss to boss kind of thing that comes from gaming. And I mean, maybe you can speak to some of the source material a little more, since I'm not quite as familiar, but I assume that Brian Lee O'Malley's graphic novels are like very much inspired by gaming and sort of take on that kind of structure.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a few years older than you. I was born in '89, so I'm gonna be 36 this year, and it's sort of like that sweet spot for my age group, sort of a couple years older, up until probably about your age there too, where we're sort of the first generation that grew up with video games always being there, but also experiencing how every new generation was cutting edge. Like, I remember when I got my Nintendo Entertainment System, the original Nintendo system. It had been out for a few years. I was probably 5 or 6, but like, playing those first Super Mario Brothers games and Duck Hunt and, games like that, where that was cutting edge. There was nothing like that. And then, of course, like, I think by the time I got that, Super Nintendo was out, but that was a little too expensive for for my mom to buy me for Christmas. But like, that DNA is all in the Scott Pilgrim books. This idea of playing games like Zelda and Mario and Final Fantasy and stuff like that, where PlayStation 1, that like that shit blew our mind back in the day. And
Yeah.
like, you look back and you're like, oh my God, these graphics are
I
awful.
know, it looks so bad in comparison.
Yeah, the game is janky, all this sort of stuff. None of it works great. But we have this fondness, this memory, and it's all there in these graphic novels, in a way of also incorporating pop culture, where as the internet was, booming, you get memes for the first time and things like that. And so you get this whole combination of love of video games and movies, especially action movies, which, Edgar Wright, he shows how much he loves action movies in Hot Fuzz. There's entire scenes dedicated to talking about the genre and their appreciation of it. And that was the biggest thing that the studios couldn't figure out. It was like, how the hell do we market this thing? Because it's a comic book movie, it's a video game movie, it's a music movie, it's a romance, it's action, it's kind of a mystery. Like, there's so many different things going on, and they sort of threw their hand up. And I remember the original trailers. The original trailers made the movie look like trash because they didn't know what to focus on. And so it's sort of focusing on the action and the romance, and they were trying to hide the comic bookiness to it. And so I think when a lot of people saw it, they're like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
And a lot of these graphics that are on screen, right behind you, the level up stuff, that's directly taken from the graphic novel. There's a moment when Scott goes to the bathroom and there's a pee bar.
Yeah. Yeah. One of my favorite gags in the movie. Yeah.
Ridiculous things like that. That's in the book. And like, you market something like that, except for being like, hey, millennials, all the things you grew up and love, this is it. And they didn't know how to explain that, because you have a bunch of people, in their 40s and 50s trying to figure out how to market to young people. And they're like, what do young people like? I don't know.
Yeah, there's this this kind of like cognitive dissonance between the studio and the audience. And I mean, in any other director's hands, it's so easy to see how this could be a potential train wreck of a movie, of a work of adaptation, because it takes someone like Edgar Wright, who has such significant, like, recognizable style in the way that he makes movies, specifically in the way that he edits. The editing in this film, the way he cuts to music, all of that brings out so much of the really fun stuff in this source material, which is using those things like video game language to represent something on screen. He having the health bars and the level ups and the people exploding into piles of coins.
Yeah, yeah.
That's just it's so much fun. And yet, yeah, the studio was probably completely perplexed because they didn't know who they were trying to sell this to. There's this really interesting thing with this series that I've found, and I found it watching the animated series again this time as well, where it really treads this line between YA and adult, in a very interesting way. At times, you feel like you're kind of watching a cartoon made for kids, and then at other times there are like awkward sex scenes or like innuendo or all of this. I mean, this whole movie is about relationships
Mhm.
and how strange and awkward they are in your early 20s when you're trying to figure out who you are, and everything is like so important. Everything is just like vitally important when you're at that age and your brain is not quite fully formed, and you think like this is going to be, the last thing ever. All of this, it's so funny because there's all this like almost like fatalistic thinking with Scott and Ramona and knives, but at the same time it's just like this wild goofy video game world where anything can happen. And also like there are so many moments of just people sitting around talking or doing nothing, or like I think about all the times that we see Scott and Wallace wake up in the bed and then like each time it's like there's another guy in the bed or
Oh,
like something different is happening. It's so lovingly rendered, I think, in a way that you can aim this at a younger audience, but also much of the humor and much of the subject matter is so applicable to being in your early to mid 20s. The soundtrack to this movie is a critical component of it. One of the main things that I took away from watching this movie for the first time was I need to make more like shitty lo-fi punk music.
oh yeah, yes.
I was I mean especially at this time I was probably still heavily making music, but the way that music is portrayed in this movie and the way that being in a band is portrayed all feel just like so relatable to me.
Yeah.
And so genuine too. Like it's like there is the whole aspect of Gideon Graves, who is this giant record executive, and then you have Envy Adams and the famous people who have kind of like made it out of the local Toronto scene. But when we're there in the kind of like dirty bars with the band, and they're trying to start to figure out their sound and who they are. I mean, I love when Scott says when she asks him, he's in a band, he goes, "Yeah, we're terrible. Please come watch us." Like that attitude is so familiar to me, and the music reflects that in that it is so just kind of infectiously fun and juvenile in a way that just isn't. There's just no pretension to it at all whatsoever.
Yeah.
I mean, the score, I guess most of the soundtrack was primarily written by Nigel Godrich and Beck, who did the songs for Sex Bomb. But
No,
then you have
just as well. Other people as well.
yeah,
Broken Sword Machine helped
yeah,
with the Sex Bomb stuff and
mhm,
the Crash and the Boys.
uh-huh, yeah,
Then Metric with the Clash of Demon Head stuff.
right,
Along with several other people too. Dan the Automator and Kid Koala. Like this is
right,
a stack soundtrack.
yeah. It's got so and such like varied people from varied genres and styles of music too, like all just kind of coming together, and it's like it all just perfectly works for the movie. Like there's not a single song that I feel like is disingenuous to what's happening on screen or anything. It just feels exactly kind of its moment. All the kind of right parts came together to make this music.
Hmm.
When they did the re-release of the soundtrack in 2021, I was pleased to find there were all these like demo recordings and stuff on there too. There's all this bonus stuff on the new recently released soundtrack, which was remastered, I think. But you know, some of the Sex Bomb songs, I'm like, I know guys who wrote songs like that and stuff, you know. So it's in that way, as well as in other ways, the film feels kind of oddly personal to me, even though I'm, you know, far away from what growing up in Canada was probably like. I guess we can go through the film a little bit and just talk about some key stuff. Opens, of course, with the 8-bit Universal logo and jingle.
Sold me right away. Like the first time you see that, and you're just like, okay, I know what I'm in store for. Got it.
Yeah, perfect way to set the tone. And then, you know, one of the best opening credits sequences songs ever at Sex Bomb's practice. Just love the way those titles are like flying at you during that sequence. And he does that shot where it goes really, really long, and he kind of stretches that hallway to make it look, you know, forced perspective. And Knives is freaking out over how good the band is. Something I noted when I was watching this series was that we're introduced to Stacy, Scott's sister, pretty early on in the film. She's a very minimal part, but she's in a lot of it. And she's like barely in the show. And I wondered if if Anna Kendrick was just too busy or what was going on there, or if it was just a minimal part from the get-go. But I found that there was kind of I
also wonder if there's some sort of issue between her and Edgar, because they dated for a while.
Oh, well, yeah, that's okay. That's,
you know, Edgar wasn't as hands-on with the animated series, or just there as a consulting producer. Someone else wrote and directed it all, so I don't know how involved he was, but he was instrumental in bringing the cast back for that.
That's true, yeah. And even when they did the 10th anniversary in 2020, they did the Zoom read, like a live table read of a scene or a set of scenes. I can't remember. I watched the whole thing, but I can't remember exactly what they did. But she was noticeably absent from that. That was a really fun thing. Were you able to catch this when it was released in theaters? Finally?
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where like I've seen it so many times. I'm like, I own it.
Yeah, you've got the autographed ticket stubs. It's,
right?
Yeah. I mean, just in this opening kind of 15, 20 minutes, so much of the Edgar Wright thing, the style, the really quick cuts, the whip pans, and you're moving through like time and space at this like breakneck speed. He does this really cool thing where there will be a scene of two characters talking, and within an instant they're in another location. Yeah. Continuing the same conversation. I really love that device as a means of like conveying information.
Yeah, you could sort of see where the lessons he learned on Hot Fuzz in terms of how to make unique camera placement and really stage your shots in interesting ways. Like you were saying there, doing these really tight close-ups of someone's face and then realizing that you're actually in a different location as the scene is continuing. That stuff he took from Hot Fuzz. And then the editing that I feel like he learned here, he really put into effect in Baby Driver. These crazy edits to the beat of the music that he eventually sort of leaned hard into. This is sort of that sweet spot in the middle where it's both the camera technique and the editing technique that he eventually kind of leaned hard into.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of it's the apex of both of those things that he's trying to do.
Yeah.
I love especially the shot where Scott's like kind of lost in thought, and Steven Stills just kind of like leans into the frame and shouts at him, and suddenly they're like at the Battle of the Bands. Just so much cool, fun stuff to keep you engaged constantly. The party scene, he first meets Ramona for the first time. The Pac-Man joke bit is very funny, which they recreate like line for line in the animated series. There's some really interesting parallels of the stuff that they stuck to exactly the script there that we can talk about later. But yeah, the P bar, which you mentioned. Playing with the aspect ratios. I mean, there's just all this like really kinetic filmmaking that is constantly reminding you like you're in a kind of made up world almost. Like you're in another reality, and the normal rules don't apply here. I think we should talk about just the cast of this film, because it's like, it's so unbelievable what a star factory this movie becomes.
Yeah.
And some of the people you can kind of say were sort of on the rise already, but I think for a lot of them, this is, even with this not being like a huge success, it is kind of a breakout role for a lot of these people. I mean, Michael Cera had already done Superbad,
Mm-hmm.
and he does this, and he's definitely on the rise. Chris Evans is definitely on the rise. This is,
Yeah, he done a little bit, but I feel like this was his attempt at trying to regain some credibility, because he was sort of drifting into this like caricature
Mhm.
aspect after
Which is
sort of
interesting, because he's like really playing that
he
up
leaned into it. Yeah,
in the
100%.
character of Lucas Lee, of playing a douchebag movie star. But he gets Captain America right after. I mean, Captain America is the very next year, which is crazy to think about, because that just, kind of launches him
Mm-hmm.
into the stratosphere. Aubrey Plaza, this definitely feels like a kind of real breakout role for her.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, she had like just been cast in Parks and Rec or something like that. So like I don't
Yeah,
know if it aired by the time this came out, but yeah, like
yeah,
this is a huge lightning in the bottle, getting her before she's huge.
yeah. It's right around that time. Brie Larson is
Same
another
thing.
one
I think
who,
Short Term 12 had come out, and that was
yeah,
about it.
yeah. She's about to do. Well, she was, so she. I guess she's on United States of Terra, the
Right.
TV show.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of what she was mostly doing.
Jason Schwartzman obviously was
She's-
probably the
yeah,
biggest star,
yeah, yeah.
other than
There's
Michael.
even like a cool energy to, like, even though his character is obviously nefarious. It's almost like he's like the cool uncle on set, kind of.
Yeah.
He's older than the rest of them, and he's been where each of these people are right now. I think in his career previously, definitely lends some credibility to the film. Mary Elizabeth Winstead, of course, like, goes on after this to do a lot of interesting stuff. Eventually, kind of like landing with Fargo and doing more like prestige TV things, I think. Brandon Routh, who had already been Superman
Yeah.
by this point.
But it was a flop, and so he was kind
Yeah,
of considered like box office poison at this point too.
yeah.
And like looking back, this movie would not work without his performance.
Oh,
Frankly, he's one of the linchpins in it.
absolutely. He's so perfect. The just like unbelievable caricature of the super powered vegan,
Yeah.
and all just the funny, goofy stuff that they do around that. Envy has that line that's like, vegans are just better than most people, or something like that. And then the vegan police show up, who are
Renee,
Thomas Jane and Clifton Collins Jr., and
right?
two more like amazing like
How do you get
character
those guys?
actors.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, I feel like Edgar Wright especially has this facility for these like really tight, incredible ensemble casts, usually kind of anchored by like two or three people. It's,
Mhm.
especially in like the Peg and Frost trilogy and everything. But he's really good at juggling all of these different personas, and all of these people in this movie are like so game for anything, and they're just really down to make fools of themselves, and surrender to this comic book world, and playing up these crazy absurd caricatures.
The one actor who's not in this movie, though, is me. I actually auditioned for this movie.
Did you really?
Yeah, I
Wow.
auditioned for young Neil.
For young Neil. Oh man, that's
Yeah.
perfect.
Basically,
Ah,
everyone in Toronto auditioned for this movie
yeah.
for various parts. I remember everyone that was like a white guy in my age range auditioned for Young Neil. A whole bunch of people auditioned for like Knives Chow. I'm trying to remember who else they were trying to find, but there's
Yeah.
a couple of the smaller parts. I know like 5 people in this movie.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, even you mentioned earlier that there were a lot of local Canadian actors, in this film, who were probably around at the time, I imagine. And I mean, we should talk a little bit about the Toronto of it all, with them, they made the effort to go there and shoot there
Mhm.
and use tons of, I don't know, historic maybe or iconic locations in Toronto in the film. Yeah, I imagine a production like this coming to town is probably pretty exciting, especially when you hear like, the level of talent attached to it.
Yeah, Toronto always has been a bit of a hub for filmmaking. It
Hmm.
often doubles for New York, which is, the big gag in the Lucas Lee scene where there's a backdrop of New York City. And then when Lucas goes flying through it, you see the CN Tower directly in the middle there, which is just like a huge, like, sort of a joke. And then even Scott makes a joke of like, they make movies in Toronto, and you're
Yeah.
like, well, it's like, yeah, of course they do. There's been a few directors who have made Toronto their second home. Guillermo del Toro is basically our unofficial mayor of that city.
Hmm.
I'm speaking as if I still live in Toronto. I don't anymore. I'm now on the West Coast.
Right.
But it's
Sure.
my hometown, so I'm always going to speak of it fondly.
Yeah.
Um, I don't remember too much of the actual filming. I was in college when it was filmed. I just graduated by the time this movie had come out. But like it was a big deal in the sense of they're making a movie about Toronto and it's filmed in Toronto. What do you mean? Like
Hmm.
Toronto never plays itself. And there was a documentary about how Toronto never plays itself on TV or something like that. It was like a CBC documentary, and it
Hmm.
showed all the different movies and TV shows that are filmed out there. Basically, all of Star Trek has been filmed out there for like the last 20 plus years.
Wow.
Star Trek loves Toronto. And so, yeah, it was a bit of a big deal. And like everyone in my age group saw this movie. Like I know
Hmm.
it was a huge flop, but like it was a hit in Toronto. There's stuff like the staircase where Lucas Lee dies that he does the grindy thingy on and then ends up exploding into coins. That's the bottom of Casa Loma where they're filming that. For months after this movie came out, there was a memorial for Lucas Lee. There was before Chris Evans picture. People would leave their like
Wow.
coins there, stuff like that. For months, it was like that. Edgar Wright had visited one time, like 6 months later, and took a picture at it because he was like, "I can't believe you guys are still doing this," which is
Wow.
crazy.
And I heard that he lived there for a while too before they shot, right? To kind of
He
get
did.
the lay of the land.
He really immersed
Um,
himself in the culture. Him and Brian really helped him out, Brian Lee O'Malley, of
mhm.
like, what's it like to live in Toronto and be a Torontonian? Because so much of the source material hinges on that. There's a lot of stuff in the graphic novels that just didn't make it on screen, and obviously because it's 6 novels, so it's hard
Sure.
to incorporate all that. But they're shot like every time they go to get pizza, it's at this shop called Pizza. That's an intersection, Bloor Street and Bathurst Street. I lived a couple blocks away from there.
Mm.
I passed out in that Pizza once after a night of drinking.
Yeah.
Across the street, there's a store called Honest Ed's. Unfortunately, it just got torn down a couple years ago and now is condos.
Mm.
Boo.
Of course.
But it's that like big sort of circus-like sign with like all the light bulbs. It shows up several times in the animated series as well. That's Toronto Institution. Every year, this is a independent family that owned it, the Mirvish family, and they own all the big theaters, like the stage theaters in Toronto. So all the Broadway type of shows that come to town,
Hmm.
they're Mirvish productions. And every year at Christmas and Thanksgiving, they would give out free turkeys to any family in need. This is a store that was so deeply ingrained in the community that like it makes me emotional talking about it no longer existing,
Yeah.
because it was such a part of the fabric of Toronto. And like you see this in every city where all the stuff that like makes a city what it is eventually becomes gentrified and goes away. And then you're just left with the memory of what it used to be.
Yeah.
Honest Ed's and the Ed Mirvish family, that is a part of the DNA of Toronto, what makes that city so neat, unique.
Yeah.
Uh, and you can't like downplay that. And then like just down the street is where Lee's Palace is, where that's where the Clash of Demon Head show is that they play.
Right.
They built that set. That's not how that wasn't the physical location because they recreated to how it looked back when the graphic novel was released in the early 2000s. They had since remodeled it from when they filmed the movie. So they're like, now we want to bring it back to where it was originally. But that is Lee's Palace, and I've seen many a shows there. They do a lot of punk alternative type of music where it's like it's bands on the come up. So like the
Yeah.
Clash Demon Head show, that would have been a wild time because this is clearly a band that's about to just absolutely blow up. and they're playing at a venue like Lee's Palace. And
Yeah,
then
where
like
aren't they talking backstage? Julie's asking them about opening for who is it?
the Pixies.
Pixies. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So they seem like that kind of, and even that scene, which is a great scene when they go on and play.
Mhm.
There's already a sense of like, the Sex Bomb gang are looking at them like, oh shit, they're like a real band.
Yeah.
they're like professional. They sound good. They
Yeah.
play well. They have stage presence. And then, but there's also this beautiful like inversion of when we actually get to know these people. They turn out to be terrible, and
Yeah.
and
Corporate sellouts.
yeah, exactly. And the kind of authenticity and honestness that we love about Sex Bomb, is revealed at the same time. They're always coming up with little interesting ways to like show you something new. I mean, I think a lot about the using the black bars to censor Julie when she swears,
Oh,
beeping
don't
them
worry about
out,
my
and
man.
yeah, and just like and even when they did that Zoom like table read, Aubrey Plaza was like, she was like holding up little pieces of paper that she had colored black, committing to that bit.
Yeah.
When he throws up that paper really quick and says, girl who has hair that looks like this," and it's just like this shitty little scribble. Yeah.
Yeah, that was done by Brian Lee O'Malley, so it was copied from
Yeah.
his like illustrations of it.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. Yeah, well, I want to ask you about the Toronto music scene a little then,
Yeah.
because especially that at that time, I'm from the southern part of the U.S., and I was in bands for a long time and kind of did my fair share of touring around, but I never quite made it up there, and so I don't really have any sense of what was going on then. I know there was a pretty important band who is either part of the soundtrack or they were kind of like, I think Edgar Wright was like trying to get them to play a show when they were. I can't remember the name of the band. Let me look it up real quick. It's a band that starts with a
Oh, that was Plumtree. That's
plum
they're
tree.
yeah, they're the band that has a song called Scott Pilgrim. That's where Brian Lee O'Malley was inspired by. They were like a 90s sort of like indie alternative band.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, they're before my time, so I don't really know them other than
Mm-hmm.
the songs that are included in the movie. I think they've got two different songs included on the soundtrack there, and Scott wears a couple of Plumtree shirts.
Yeah.
Yeah, Toronto had a fantastic music scene, and like you as someone that played in band, I feel like you can probably relate to how now it sort of feels like, due to the democratization of the internet, there isn't really music scenes in the way that there used to be. You'll get like
No.
overall genre, scenes, but not in the way of like, oh, this is what New York City rock sounded like in the early 2000s, the sort of the stroke scene,
Mm-hmm.
or stuff like that. I'm trying to think of like, or like the Detroit scene, or
Yeah.
Houston, like all these different cities where you'd have a whole bunch of bands sort of with a similar vibe and style, and it was unique from anything else that was being made. Toronto was the exact same way. Both Toronto and Montreal had excellent indie rock scenes, and
Mm-hmm.
I contend that in that era of the like from about 98 till about 2010 was putting out probably the best indie music anywhere in the world, frankly.
Yeah.
Um,
Obviously,
specific,
like Arcade Fire and people like that are kind of out of that era, right? And
yeah, yeah, that was
um,
coming out of Montreal. And so
yeah.
there were a lot of bands like that where in Montreal specifically, they were playing with like larger ensembles. They were doing more of the electronica sort of stuff. And then in
Mm-hmm.
Toronto, it was a lot more of the like, guitar based music that was happening. Broken Social Scene is sort of the unofficial leader of the Toronto scene. You look at, they're essentially 3 to 5 band members, but they basically, if you're from Toronto, you're a part of Broken Social Scene. That was the joke,
Mm-hmm.
because anytime you were in town, Broken Social Scene would either come out onto your show, or you would go over to and play at their show. So you can look at the amount of people who contributed, and they've got like 20, 30 names who are considered official band members. In
Wow.
reality, it's about 3 to 5 guys that do most of it. Kevin Drew is the main guy, the lead singer. Also went to my high school. So
Mm.
did Emily Haynes, the lead singer of Metric, who does
Oh, okay.
vocals for Brie Larson.
Yeah.
They both I went to an arts performing high school. So both of those bands came out of that scene at the same time. So Metric, Stars, Broken Social Scene. I'm trying to rattle off a couple other of those band names, but like this very heartfelt, I guess now you'd call it maybe sad boy music a little bit, but
Mm-hmm.
like guitar based, very, very deeply personal lyrics. And we hear
Yeah.
some of the songs. Like there's a great moment where the song Anthem for a 17-year-old girl plays when Knives gets broken up at for the last time or whatever at the Katanagi Twins show.
Mm-hmm.
That's a Broken Social Scene song. That's an iconic Toronto song, with the lead singer from that being Emily Haynes from Metric and Sarah Million from Stars. So they do the two female vocals for Broken Social Scene. But yeah, and then Sloan helped
Oh
teach
yeah.
band how to
Sure.
play. They were a
Yeah.
little bit earlier than those bands, and they made a bit more of an impact in the U.S. than a lot of the other Canadian bands. A lot of people know them from like Money City Maniacs and stuff like that, where
Yeah.
they're a classic band.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're Toronto based. I think they're from the East Coast. I can't remember, but yeah, the influence is all over this film in terms of both some of the soundtrack choices and then who Edgar brought in to help with shaping the music, and Nigel Godrich's help as well too.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like the fact that we get Lee's Palace on screen, that's huge. The other big thing is the record shop that they're shopping at is a store called Sonic Boom. That originally the location that they're filming at is literally across the street from Lee's Palace. Since then, they've had to move several times due to their lease and things like that. And right next door to that was the theater where I saw the screening with Edgar Wright there. What was then called the Bloor Cinema has since been bought by a documentary festival called Hot Docs, so it's now the Hot Docs Theater.
Mm.
So like there's so much Toronto history in this, and like
Yeah.
just showing Sonic Boom on screen, that's a big deal. Like
Yeah.
we love that store, and every week they would do a theme display of a new album that's coming out. And so they would do these custom artworks displays, kind of like how like a Macy's would do a Christmas display window. They would do
Right.
that for a new album. And so
Oh, that's
whatever
rad.
was what was the cool new album coming out this month? Like, was it the New Pornographers? Was it Metric? Was it Broken Social Scene? Usually Canadian based, or like someone that's like on the come up, something like
Mm-hmm.
that. From Above 1979, they're Canadian, stuff like
Yeah.
that. Like, all these cool bands, they always had the best displays.
Yeah. Is that store still open?
Yep,
Still
they're
around?
just in a different location now,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, they've become very commercialized. Where like you go in and they're selling more knickknacks. Like if you go
Yeah.
into like the
Yeah.
records, so you're just like, I get it. You
Yeah.
got to pay rent and stuff like that. And they
Right.
do have some cool stuff. They have like a 45 jukebox where
Oh, nice.
or a vending machine where you put in your money, whatever it is. I think it's like $5, and you get a mystery 45. And so
Oh,
like they'll
that's
do
really
like
cool.
their, Instagram Reels or TikTok when a band comes in, they'll be like, "Oh, and this is what I'm getting in my mystery 45 vending machine," and sort of talk a little bit like that. So like they
Yeah.
are saying they don't have the same cultural dominance they had in the Toronto scene back in the day, because they would do like live performances and record signings and all this sort of stuff. And I think they still do that, but not to the extent that they had the sort of chokehold on the Toronto music scene back in the day, where like that was the place to go.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like there was a lot of kind of like crossover a little bit with the sort of Midwestern kind of like emo, but also kind of folky scene that was happening at the same time with like Bright Eyes and those kinds of people. But yeah, there's a lot of like thematic resonance, I think, with those groups. I mean, I love the fact that we're getting Beck and Nigel Godrich, who is really only known as a producer at this time, and primarily known as Radiohead's producer, doing these like really raw, loud, nasty, kind of messy songs with this like overcranked bass, distortion pedals, although people just like kind of shouting the lyrics and stuff. It's very like out of both of their wheelhouses.
Yeah, because like neither Radiohead or Beck had sounded like that for like what 15 years. Like early Radiohead has a bit of that, early Beck has a bit of that, but like they very clean sounding around this era.
Yeah, and also just like wildly different genre wise and stylistically, just doing like lots. I mean, Radiohead is in 2010.
Like
That's
in
what
Rainbow.
that's like right after In Rainbows. So
Yeah.
yeah, but very much more electronic. I think Beck is about to do that Morning Phase album. I listen to the soundtrack constantly, even when I'm not thinking about the film. And I've added like all of Sex Bomb's songs to my playlists and everything. I mean, the movie itself, it's pretty. The plot is very simple, really. These two young people fall in love, and Scott has to fight all of Ramona's evil exes in order to win her heart and free her from Gideon Graves and his clutches. Yeah, I mean, I just love the way that it goes from kind of every scene leads into the next, while also like providing some character. But we haven't even talked about Kieran Culkin as Wallace, by the way. One of my favorite characters. Yeah, insane.
Yeah.
One of my favorite characters in the film. He has some of the funniest lines. I love when he says, "Oh, Scott's like accusing him of having a double standard when he hooks up with Stacy's boyfriend." He says, "I have it here somewhere."
Take it up with Liberace's.
Yeah, I didn't make the gay rule book. You got a problem with it? Take it up with Liberace's ghost. Oh, so funny. The scene where he's also like giving him a pep talk, but also like subtly kicking him out of the apartment.
Yeah.
is really funny. And Scott's like freaking out about the date, and he goes, "You were worried about me ganging up the place." Like he has the best. They have a really just funny, good rapport and back and forth. Would love to see Kieran Culkin in another Edgar Wright movie. I think that needs to happen again soon, especially now that he's hot off his Oscar win. A gig is a gig is a gig is a gig. It's
a gig.
Yeah, Stephen Still's line that really hit with me this time around, because it's so true. I mean, like when I was 20, 21, 22, trying to get any kind of show in town, and I come from a small town, there were like 2 venues to play music, and getting a show at one of them proved to be almost impossible for a really long time. And yeah, when you're a struggling musician, you're willing to pretty much do whatever it takes. But I love that they also they take the deal with Gideon, right, and basically sub out Scott for young Neil on bass. But they are also still trying to, scratch out a name for themselves, and they're young kids, right? So they're just like taking the most obvious route to be able to further their goals as a band, I think. Obviously that plays out to comical effects when they're all dressed in their like matching suits and stuff, playing at the party. The Katinagi twin sequence is so sick. It's so amazing. That song that Sex Bomb is playing during that, which I think is called, I can't remember what it's called, but that's a really good song. The going to the Chaos Theater and the password being whatever. And then the second password is just a sigh. Really funny.
Culture as well too, that era, 2010.
Yeah, I mean that's another thing that's really perfectly like crystallized in amber in this movie is the hipster culture, the kind of it's like in the 90s, the slacker culture that like Richard Linklater and people like that were popularizing. This is kind of the natural extension of that, I think, but with the sort of dawn of stuff like MySpace and this very primitive social media that now has completely, spiraled into something else. But the fashion, all the stuff that they're wearing, especially the stuff that Scott wears. This is another thing that really, I think, crosses over with that kind of Midwestern emo folk scene is the fashion. I mean, I remember, kids in high school, like all of us had that like swoopy hair that young Neil has, the haircut,
the
t-shirt that's too small, but also baggy jeans. But then you go to tight jeans because that becomes cool. Yeah. And the ironic t-shirt culture, like people were just wearing these dumb shirts that had silly slogans on them all the time. It's so weird to me that this movie, like, it is so kind of its time, right? It's like, it's really representative of a certain place and time and subculture, but it also feels like it kind of hasn't aged very much. It is a little bit timeless, I think, in just how fun the filmmaking is and how like kind of kinetic it is. There are a few like really choice dialogue lines, I will say. Yeah, there's some things that have aged a little poorly. I know I had completely forgotten about Gideon's kind of racist remark towards knives at the tail end of that scene. He calls her like Kung Pao chicken or something ridiculous. And there are a few other things that are kind of just, were of the moment and and like upon critical reevaluation don't exactly stand up.
I mean, I would say it's slightly better than a lot of the other mainstream comedies
Sure.
of that era, which, that's a low
Yeah.
bar to kind of cross. But there's definitely a couple times where it's been a few years since I've now watched it where I'm just like, oh, forgot about that line there. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not the worst, but it's enough that like we clock it that the way that, unfortunately, that's just how people
Yeah.
talk then.
Yeah, exactly. And that also, that's also part of comic book culture as well. I think a while back I covered the film Ghost World, which was adapted from one of my favorite comic books by one of my favorite cartoonists. And there's some really choice language in that film and in the source material. Some things that today would just be considered pretty poor, but it's representative of the way that these people, and specifically the way that these characters act, right? It's part of character flaws are also character traits. I just like to constantly remind people about that when someone's maybe up in arms about something that a character in a movie said 20 years ago or whatever.
Like,
But
Gideon Graves is not a good person. Like,
yeah,
him saying
exactly.
something racist makes sense for his character. It's
Right.
more the casual conversation between the
Yeah.
band when going to Julie's party and things like that. When they say, "Oh, this is retarded," it's like, "Whoa, okay."
Yeah.
That's how people talk. I get it.
Yeah.
But like,
That's an unfortunate kind of byproduct of the time and place of this film. I do love the obviously Scott gets kind of defeated the first time around with Gideon and goes into the sort of subspace highway. And I love the kind of playing back the second life when he goes back and he just like, what does he say to the guy at the door? He's like, "You're stupid," or something, and just walks through the door, and he plays it over again, and he's more prepared this time. And now, instead of earning the power of love, he's earned the power of self-respect.
because he wants to fight Gideon for him.
Yeah, exactly. Pulls out a blue sword. I mean, we haven't even really talked much, but the fight choreography in this movie is just kind of unreal. I mean, you mentioned at the top about how good Edgar Wright is directing action, especially in Hot Fuzz, and then this is kind of the next level up from that. But the choreography is so strong, and there are obviously a lot of sequences where we can tell that stunt doubles are doing a lot of work, but it actually surprised me this time around just how much of this stuff that Michael Cera is doing on his own. I mean, there are plenty of shots where you see that he's clearly doing this pretty intense choreography. So is Mary Elizabeth Winstead and Jason Schwartzman in his scenes. And it's shot in the way that today people would like shoot this with 12 different setups and be cutting all over the place, and you aren't really able to tell what's happening in the action and what's going on. But you can always tell where you are in these fight scenes, even when the camera tricks get kind of insane, or with like crash zooms. Or I mean, I love when Todd throws Scott through that wall, and you see him kind of go through like a bunch of different walls in that room, and then it's just complete dark, and inside he's started to play his bass, and that leads logically to the next kind of phase of the battle, which is the bass battle, where they face off with their basses.
Probably my favorite sequence of the whole movie, frankly, the bass off.
It's really good. It's really, really good. Yeah, the best fights. Yeah, that's definitely up there, I think. The final fight, I mean, it's just so cool, the final fight, because he's just like wiping out all those ninjas just kind of very quickly and stuff. And then, of course, when Knives and Ramona join in. Yeah, I mean, I never get tired of watching this, even though I know exactly how everything's going to go every time. There's always something fun and interesting and unique. This time I had completely forgotten they do this thing when Scott comes home to the apartment and he's telling Wallace about how he got a date with Ramona. They're doing the Seinfeld laugh track and like some of the theme music from Seinfeld in the back. And I had completely forgotten about that.
It's sort of a shame the way Michael Cera's career was treated because like he came up doing stuff like Superbad where he was sort of the face of this emerging comedy movement, and then he kind of had a string of flops as
Mm-hmm.
mainstream comedy just sort of fell out of favor
Mm-hmm.
very quickly. And media, along with Scott Pilgrim, was one of the reasons that he basically was like, I don't want to say he was banned or blacklisted or anything, but he was basically like, okay, you're not a leading man. We're not
Yeah.
casting you in budget stuff anymore. And so he sort of disappeared into this like not just indie world, but like super indie world where you look at his resume and like he was steadily working for like 10, 15 years. And you're like, I literally haven't heard of any of these movies.
Mm-hmm.
Who are the directors you're working with
Mm-hmm.
on these like, budget things? And slowly, I feel like in the last 5 to 7 years, he started to reappear in more mainstream things again.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think people are able to be like, oh, yeah, Michael Cera was kind of great the whole time. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't his fault that mainstream comedies fell out of favor. Why was he, given the brunt of the blame for that? And you look back at something like this, his performance is excellent. He handles a very complicated role with a lot of grace, trying to handle this is a guy who can't move on from his past,
Yeah.
ends up falling in love, and still has to figure out how, the final scene of him earning the power of self-respect. That's what he needed to do the whole time, was get self-respect. That's the whole reason why he's in this mess. And he does such a good job with the comedy and the action, the pathos, all this sort of stuff. And so it's definitely crazy going back and being like, he's been good the whole time, guys. Like, I don't know what anyone.
Yeah. And his timing too. His
Oh,
comedic
good.
timing is impeccable. Yeah, I mean there's this really interesting thing. He does kind of come along at this moment of like the kind of Seth Rogen, Judd Apatow camp of big mainstream comedies. But he's almost too young at that time to be really the lead of a lot of
Yeah.
those movies. He's also like not a traditional leading man looks wise, and so it's not like he can really pivot into the action comedy the way that a lot of the other guys who were really leading those movies at the time did. And so yeah, he kind of gets shunted off to this sort of very small ecosystem of doing these very small movies, often not even like big parts either. He'll
Yeah.
do a couple days on this, or he'll show up for 10 minutes in one random thing. And then I feel like his real kind of like reemergence starts when they rebooted Arrested Development. And
Between that and Twin Peaks: The Return.
yeah, exactly. That's another great example of just like, I'm just going to show up and do this hilarious wild scene in, one of what will become known as one of the greatest pieces of film of TV filmmaking of all time.